I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the cruel mass murder of 4 University of Idaho students. A killer caught by some compelling evidence, including surveillance video that we're seeing for the very first time. Here's the story. In the stillness of a cold Idaho night, 4 University of Idaho students were slaughtered in their off-campus home. Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Their killer moved like a shadow through the house, leaving behind a trail of horror and shattered lives. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood captured his white Hyundai Elantra circling the crime scene multiple times before the murders and speeding away moments after. The killer's cell phone data, DNA on a knife sheath, and the chilling video timeline point to one place and one place only. And as a result, the mass murderer pleaded guilty, but was spared a death sentence by prosecutors who gave him a deal. And now we are learning more about what happened as prosecutors slowly release the public records and public evidence from the case. All right, this is a big show tonight because we're going to see some images, video, and photos that we've never seen before from this case involving the absolutely cruel, brutal murder of those 4 University of Idaho students. And we're going to begin with some surveillance video. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who is with us. Cody, let's go through this. What does this video show us?
Well, Vinny, it's a lot. This full video shows the time frame between 3:30 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. So we're seeing moments both before and after the murders. Now, investigators say we see the killer drive by the victim's house multiple times in his white Hyundai Elantra. Now, the camera was close by, facing away from the victim's house. You can see here where the crime scene was. That surveillance camera is pointing toward 2 side streets. Now, all this video was obtained by the Idaho Statesman, and it was given to them by the Moscow Police Department. Let's watch the first time we see the killer's white Hyundai Elantra pass by at 3:30 a.m. Vinny, you saw it right there. The car was only on screen for roughly 10 seconds. Now the Elantra passes by the surveillance camera 6 more times before we see it the final time. That's obviously when it's speeding off after the murders. Now, we see it at 3:33 a.m. coming down King Road toward the house. We see it again at 3:38 a.m. in the middle of that intersection again, at 3:40 a.m. on King Road, at 3:56 a.m. on King Road. That's a 16-minute gap there, and again at 3:58 a.m. Now let's watch the final approach of the killer's car before he starts trying to park it. Now this is 6 minutes later than what we just saw at 4:04 a.m. Again, this video is given to the Idaho Statesman. And then you see it right there. It seems like he came onto King Road a little faster than before during that particular pass. Now, 2 minutes after that, we see the killer do something just a little bit different. At 4:06 a.m., we see the Elantra making that infamous K-turn at that same intersection that we heard about as this investigation unfolded over the past few years. But now we want to show you the final time the Elantra is captured on this surveillance video when the killer is speeding away from the crime scene after the murders. This is at 4:20 a.m., 14 minutes after we just saw that K-turn. And again, this video given to the Idaho Statesman. So clearly moving a little bit faster there, and you could even hear the tire screech as he turned away down that road. Now, these are the times when the killer's white Elantra drives past their surveillance camera. Before the murders, according to investigators, he's captured on camera 8 times from 3:30 a.m. through making that K-turn at 4:06 a.m. So all those times he's passing by, they take place over a 36-minute time period. And here is a list of the duration of those passes, how long the killer's Elantra is seen on that surveillance camera each time. You can see he's going about the same speed for the first few passes. He's on camera for roughly 9 to 12 seconds, but then he's going much faster. The final time after he makes that K-turn, Vinny, he's on camera for only 7 seconds.
That is fascinating. Not only what we saw, but what we heard. I mean, the tires screeching on the way out. That is so significant and all that. And it did appear that the car is speeding up as he makes that final approach. Cody Thomas, thanks so much for breaking that down for us. And all of that brings us to the first question in our investigation. How important was the surveillance video? How important was it in order to track down a killer and to understand what happened here? Here to help answer that question, former homicide detective Chris McDonough, who's been out there. He's also the host of The Interview Room with Chris McDonough, and retired FBI agent Stuart Fillmore. All right, Chris, I'll start with you. How important do you believe this video was in the overall investigation?
I think it was significant. I mean, the old saying, right, in order to understand why the lion gets his prey, he first tests the water hole. And so this video would have played extremely well for the prosecution, specifically against, the some other dude narrative.
And how about from your perspective, Stuart, in solving this case, right? We know the DNA, huge part, but before we ever got to the DNA, we kept hearing about a white Elantra. What are your thoughts about the significance of this particular surveillance video?
Well, Vinny, it ends up, you had the DNA on the knife sheath, rather. That ended up being, clearly the most critical piece of evidence. But had you not had that, I think you still could have developed a case, or at least made Kohberger a suspect, just based on this Elantra. I mean, that is huge. It's going by there. He's doing these drive-by surveillances, clearly to assess, who's there. Is it safe for him to try to go in? You just can't really. In some ways, I think maybe you might actually say the surveillance video is more important than the knife sheath.
And Chris, what are your thoughts and your analysis of the number of times that he passed by on that night, and what it tells you?
Well, 36 minutes is a tremendous amount of time. And what that's showing us, the fact that he went digitally dark, that video itself now can put him in or near the crime scene as a whole, which shows intent. That 36 minutes, he's either, trying to figure out what's my point of entry, this is the time I got to do it. And so that video can kind of give us an idea into how he's building internally into committing this murder.
And Stuart, what struck me, like I told Cody, the screeching tires. And clearly, just from eyeballing the video and timing it, also you could see that he's going at a much higher pace. Are you surprised that someone that took perhaps months here planning and plotting this whole thing in the moment is like speeding away from the crime scene?
That's not surprising that he's doing that. And I'll tell you, for me, this was the first time that I've actually heard the audio with this surveillance video. So it's interesting to hear those tires screeching, and does tell you. No matter how well he planned this thing, I'm presuming that he had never killed before. So this would have been a new experience for him, one maybe he had fantasized about. But regardless, his adrenaline was up. He probably, he had this maybe an unexpected encounter with the girl that identified him, and he just wants to get out of there at this point. So yeah, he's in fight or flight at this point, and he's flight. And that's those screeching tires are really indicative of that.
And what's interesting, Chris, that in that moment, speeding away from the crime scene where he's just taken 4 lives. We know there's blood. We know there's a murder weapon. We know he's wearing some sort of a disguise or a ski mask, all that, yet none of that evidence was ever recovered. So despite the adrenaline in the moment, it seems he's able to gather himself afterwards because he does a relatively good job of disposing of evidence and cleaning out that car.
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. I mean, and it also gives us some additional ideas in relationship to how this guy thinks, because he was able to control himself, even though he almost lost it. I mean, when he comes around that corner at the bottom, but he was able to regain. So he was living. I agree with Stuart. He was at his highest point that night when he was making that turn and getting out of that neighborhood. He was really going for it.
And Stuart, what are your thoughts about the multiple passes? Do you think he was eyeballing the inside of the house, trying to get his nerve up? What do you think's going on in those moments?
A combination of both. I think clearly he's doing the drive-by surveillance just to see, is there a party going on there? Is this a house full of people? You can tell that maybe somewhat from who's parked there, but in the days of Uber, now that we're in now, there could have been 15 people in that house. So he's trying to assess that, but maybe just as important, he's also getting his nerve up, because again, I think this was his first time, something maybe he'd been fantasizing about, but he had to get that nerve up a little bit.
All right, our guests are going to stay with us as we continue to take a look at some of the new evidence. Up next, what does the killer's cell phone reveal?
Patriarch of the Adelson family gets arrested.
Terrible. Donna Adelson is facing charges of murder, the death of her former son-in-law, Dan Markell.
Prosecutors say a bitter child custody battle was the motive for the murder-for-hire plot.
Now that Donna has turned into a defendant, what's next for the Adelson clan?
Now that the ship is really sinking fast, blood doesn't matter that much.
The Matriarch Mastermind murder trial. Live coverage begins August 19th, only on Court TV.
I won't stand here and give you what you want. I won't offer you tears. I won't offer you trembling. Disappointments like you thrive on pain, on fear, and on the illusion of power. And I won't feed your beast. Instead, I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer. You didn't win. You just exposed yourself as the coward you are. You're a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser who thought you were so much smarter than everybody else.
You're not that good at anything. You couldn't secure a job. You couldn't get along with others. You couldn't even get a female to look in your direction.
That was Kaylee's sister, Olivia, at the sentencing of the mass murderer, speaking a lot of truth that day. Not very smart, right? So I want you to take a listen to investigators afterwards talking about the killer's phone and phone evidence. Take a listen.
We had the world's foremost experts on this look into it, and there was evidence that he had used software to wipe many of his devices relatively effectively, so there wasn't much evidence obtained after that.
He regularly used software to try to wipe, clear things off. He used VPN on his devices also.
All right, tried to, right? Tried to. Did he get everything? That brings us to the next question in our investigation. What does the killer's cell phone reveal? What were they able to get from it? Here to help with our investigation is creator and host of Grizzly True Crime on YouTube, Gisela K, and journalist Howard Blum. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, When the Night Comes Falling, which examines the murders of the 4 University of Idaho students. Great to have you both here. I want to read this from The Independent. They did an interview here. They spoke with Heather Barnhart, who's a senior director of research at Cellbrite. We know Cellbrite, right? Cellbrite takes a look at the cell phone. She went through his phone. He didn't just Google these cases, she said. He downloaded full PDFs of case files, not once but repeatedly. He was downloading detailed reports on serial killers, including Danny Rolling, who also murdered college students using a similar knife. This wasn't casual browsing. This was meticulous research, she added. She also said he failed to do a full cleanup of his phone. Details of what the team found, including scrubbed files, private browsing, VPN activity, and obsessive downloads about other serial killers, were found hidden deep in his phone, not in a visible gallery or standard folder, but in buried file directories that required forensic tools to uncover. He had also downloaded reports on the Idaho murders and extensive searches of his victims. Gisela K., what are your thoughts here about what we're finding out on his cell phone?
I think there's a lot more to offer there than what he ever thought. I think he thought he cleaned everything up, but honestly, with trials, I live for these Cellbrite, digital forensic experts, and I know we didn't get to see the trial, but hearing what they found was very interesting. For me, the most interesting was this passive log on to a Wi-Fi network, which was the Mad Greek restaurant where two of the victims worked, Xana Kernodle and Madison Mogen. So it doesn't mean that he logged on that night, or, they didn't say any specific times in this report, but he had been there before, and that's the first sort of link we have to any of the victims in this case.
Yeah, making that connection to where Maddie and Xana worked at the Mad Greek. Howard, what are your thoughts about this obsession, absolute obsession with serial killers, including Danny Rolling?
Well, that's sort of his job. He's a student of criminal justice. That is, just circumstantial evidence. It brings out the weakness of the prosecution's case, and that he had every right to look into these cases, and he could have justified doing it. His cell phone is a portrait of his life, and he was a student, and this is what a student who is studying serial killers would look at. I think his defense team could have made a very good argument that it was irrelevant.
However, I would just add, Howard, what are your thoughts about the fact that he attempted to scrub this information from his phone? So it's not just researching it. A student researches, but a student's not going to make sure he scrubs his phone and tries to eliminate that information.
Again, this is just like his turning off the phone when the murders occurred. From 2:47 approximately to 4:46, his phone is turned off. That's interesting, but is it enough to have sent a man to convict him without reasonable doubt to a death sentence? I think it just puts together this mosaic of circumstantial evidence, but none of it is anything that would convict him, I don't think, in my opinion.
Gisela, I found interesting researching Danny Rolling. It was a trial we covered here on Court TV. Also a K-bar knife in that case. Also the ski mask. Also the gloves. Almost like a how-to kind of kit if you really got into the deep details of the Rolling case.
Yeah, and because these were students that were murdered, on December 19th of 2022, I had made my own little speculative profile, and I was thinking, what if he was inspired by someone like Ted Bundy or Danny Rolling? So when I read this article from The Independent, from the Cellbrite team, to hear that he was downloading full reports of Danny Rolling, and of course we know about his obsession with Ted Bundy, was quite interesting, and Danny Rolling used a K-bar knife. So they did say that this was meticulous research. It went way beyond just him being a PhD student in criminology. It seemed like obsession and planning, and as you said, with using VPNs and deleting things. So I think they found a lot more, yes, circumstantial evidence, but put it all together, a lot more compelling evidence than we ever thought.
Yeah, and some of the images you're seeing are from the Rolling trial. And we're going to get into a lot more detail on that tomorrow night here on Vinnie Politan Investigates. Howard, let's go back to what Gisela first talked about, which was the phone having a history of logging onto the Wi-Fi at the Mad Greek. We know 2 of the victims worked there. Do you believe that he spent time there, that he went to look at these women in their workplace?
When I did reporting, one of the things I found out was that Kohberger had gone to the Mad Greek. I had found no evidence that he'd ever talked to Maddie, who was a waitress there, or to Xana, but all he needed to do was to see him. He was a man to whom obsessions come easily, and I believe there was something about Maddie's blonde vitality that somehow set off something inside his mind that set him on this whole path of murder. And as I've been written about, I believe she was always the primary target and everyone else was just collateral damage. And this phone putting him there at the Mad Greek, tying into their Wi-Fi, I think supports that theory. But again, these are all hypotheses, and the answers are at this moment beyond our grasp until Kohberger begins to speak. It's one of the reasons why I'm so disappointed that the prosecution didn't demand an allocution that gave us answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there, Howard, absolutely. Howard Blum, Gisela Kay, great to have you both on the program. Great to see you. Thank you so much. Up next, what story do the crime scene photos tell? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Their killers locked up, but now for the first time we're seeing images of the crime scene. Here's the story. In the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, horror struck when 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were savagely murdered in their own home. The killers stalked them, moving silently through the dark, armed with a fixed blade knife. The brutality was staggering. Multiple stab wounds, blood seeping across bedroom floors, and signs of a frenzied attack. Chilling crime scene photos sealed for years show overturned furniture, blood-stained walls, and personal belongings frozen in chaos. Investigators linked the mass murderer through DNA on a knife sheath left behind, cell phone records, and his white Hyundai Elantra seen on surveillance video. The images, prosecutors argue, reveal the savage reality of that November night, turning a peaceful home into a house of nightmares. We're going to take a look at some of those photos from the crime scene in a moment. I want you to take a listen to Kaylee's dad, Steve Gonzalez, talking about those final moments of his daughter's life.
It was horrific what Kaylee went through. Yeah, and I don't want to protect this guy, but I won't give out all the details. I'll be general, but yeah, she was stabbed over 30 plus times, and she was struck, and there was quite a bit of damage to her face. So this guy's just an absolute monster. Anyone who thinks that he's otherwise, I just looked at pure demons out there. When I was looking at him, we had to stare down, and he's just filled with demons. He's dark pits of eyes, and there's something seriously wrong with that man.
Trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link, and we have not found one. Not one.
We have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
The evidence suggested that there was a reason that this particular house was chosen. What that reason is, we don't know. We don't know who the target was, and we're not going to speculate on that up here today. But we can tell you that for whatever reason, Mr. Kohberger chose that residence. Perhaps it's the location, layout, we don't know.
Okay, so the location is the crime scene. It's no longer there. But obviously when investigators went in, they took lots of important photographs. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. What story do the crime scene photos tell? Here to help answer that question, forensic death investigator and host of the very popular Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan, and still with us, former homicide detective Chris McDonough. All right, we're going to take a look at some photos here. These photos are from NBC News, given to affiliate KTVB. Let's take a look at the first one. And this is, as we take a look at it, Joseph Scott Morgan, looking at this first one, I see a pillow, I see some blood. This is one of the beds. What story is this photo telling you?
When you look at the wall, Vinny, and you've got these little satellite depositions of blood there, they have tails on them. What I mean that they have a point which goes to directionality. When you're talking about the movement of blood, this gives you an idea of the blood traveling in one direction. This could be consistent with perhaps some type of impact, such as punch, that generates this kind of deposition, or it could be, it might be some level of cast off. It doesn't look like a classic cast off. However, moving forward of the light switch that you see toward the head of the bed, still on the wall, that's a pretty significant concentration of blood there. You've got a kind of a central area there where you've got descending blood that is rather dynamic from that point. You have a central point of origin there. It could be contact with the body, slamming into that particular location, or it could be perhaps the instrument generating that kind of dynamic flow or deposition when impacting a body. A lot going on here on the wall. More of the stuff that you're seeing concentrated, say for instance on the pillow and then on the comforter, is more consistent just looking at it very broadly, not being able to appreciate it up close, but just those large droplets that you're seeing there. That's almost a passive type of deposition. And some of that stuff might be transferred, particularly on the pillow, where it's being transferred as a result of contact from, say, a head that has blood originating from it onto the surface of the pillow. Kind of hard to say from that particular photo, though.
Let's get to the next photo. Chris McDonough, let's take a look at this one. It's another bedroom. Part of it is blurred, and it was blurred, purposefully by law enforcement. Let's take a look at that photo. What story is this telling you?
Well, if we start on the left wall, moving over, that appears to be cast off, which Doc Morgan is talking about, and of course that could come from either the weapon strike itself, and then on the far wall, which would be the north wall there, you also see what consistently would be cast off from a strike of the weapon coming either up or down. We'd have to follow those tails that Doc Morgan is talking about. And then if we go over to the right, which would be the east, there we see some pooling on the floor. I'm assuming that's going to be where one of the victims ultimately ended up. You can see on the table there what appears to potentially be finger movement of some sort towards the left side of the just underneath the tabletop. And then, of course, you have some 90-degree directional, which could have come off of the weapon in of itself.
Now, the next one, Joseph Scott Morgan, is another bedroom. And I'm looking at this one, and what I noticed were a lot of the pictures on the wall. And I'm wondering if you agree that this might be Dylan's bedroom, which was described as having pictures of eyebrows in it. What are you taking away from this photo?
Well, I don't know. It looks pretty much like any person's bedroom could be. It's disorganized to a great degree, but you don't see any kind of deposition of blood in here. We've got an unmade bed. Let's think about this young woman that may have occupied the space, she's been lingering in here for a protracted period of time, perhaps wringing her hands, a lot of anxiety going on. But that doesn't really translate into anything that has value as far from an evidentiary standpoint, unless you apply a principle that I've kind of come to adopt in forensics, and that is negative findings are just as probative and revealing as positive findings. So the absence of blood in here would be an indication that there was not, say, for instance, an event that occurred in here. So you would move very quickly, just from a crime scene perspective, to kind of check this one off the list to move on to the next one. Of course, you would examine it very carefully and look for anything in there before you began to eliminate it. But an absence of evidence is just as important as the presence of evidence.
Chris McDonough, let's take a look at the next one. This is one of the floors, and we see appears to be some blood on the floor.
Yeah, so I'm not going to take Doc Morgan's thunder here because we talked about this earlier today. That is what we would call 90-degree directional, meaning the suspect actually stood there, and those are droplets from the knife. And remember, that knife itself had a blood groove on it. So the interesting thing about this, and I'll let Doc Morgan talk a little bit more about it, but he's thinking about what's going on here. And so I just want to add one other dovetail into what Doc Morgan's probably going to say, is remember, he's got these photos now back at his holding cell in the Department of Correction, and he is reliving this entire fantasy, because now that this case is adjudicated, if he ever goes towards an appeal, he's going to have all of this in his holding cell there.
Wow. Joe Scott Morgan, did you have something to say about this photo?
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. Out of every photo that I've observed from this crime scene, for me personally, this is the most chilling, because this represents a pause on the part of the perpetrator. Just imagine if you're holding a knife, as Chris had mentioned, and it's got the blood groove on it, which is this kind of indentation on the side, and it's super saturated with blood, the surface of it. He's holding this thing downward, okay? Just imagine this knife being at his side, and gravity is playing a part in here, because it's drawing all of that wet, fresh blood off of that blade, and it's traveling straight down. Do you see how there's no dynamic movement of the blood? You don't have a tail leading off anywhere. It's a straight droplet where it's impacting the floor. And here's the chilling part. He's moving his hand while he's doing this, or he's moving the positionality of his body. So if you look to the left, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 drops there that are kind of isolated over there. Well, for a moment, he held that blade in that position, a static position, so that those drops fell. Then he pans to the right. You've got some in the center. Pans further to the right. You've got more. You've got this cluster over here. So, Vin, it's almost like if you imagine a camera panning about, observing what has happened, and then trying to further understand, what do I do next? That's where the chill comes from here. Wow. You know, you can look at all the dynamic stuff where you've got cast off, and that's absolutely horrible. But this is like a snapshot of him pausing for a moment and considering what has happened at that moment in time.
Let's get to one more photo for this segment. And this is, again, another room. You can see the top left part is blurred. Chris McDonough, what are you seeing here? What story is this photo telling you?
You know, I think what struck me in this particular photo, Vinny, this is what we would call an overall photograph, right, of the room. It may be Xana's room, but if you notice the 2 IDs on the table, I thought that was a very curious placement in relationship to why those identification cards are out. With now the evidence that we know he had additional identification cards that they recovered in a box back in Pennsylvania. So My first question was he going through, some of the victims' belongings, or, of course, did the victims themselves, is this their life pattern and their habit, just to throw their identification cards up on top of the desk? But that's what struck out to me. That's what, stuck out to me the most.
Chris McDonough, host of The Interview Room, thank you so much for your help tonight. Joseph Scott Morgan is going to stick around. When we come back, we're going to take a look at more crime scene photos and try to figure out what story they are telling.
A woman's remains found scattered throughout a 3-mile area.
Now, a former naval officer stands trial accused of killing his wife.
The Dismembered Wife murder trial. Live coverage weekdays, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
These are the cases that captivated the world.
Couldn't keep my life straight.
They were killed by their own children.
That challenged the legal system and ourselves. Court TV, legendary trials.
Today we are here to prove to the world that you picked the wrong families. The wrong state, the wrong police officers, the wrong community. You tried to break our community apart. You tried to plant fear. You tried to divide us. You failed. Instead, your actions have united everyone in their disgust for you. I just learned from these lead investigators, to their shock, they worked in an investigation and actually worked with Pennsylvania police officers and the federal FBI. You united everyone. Everyone was united after you.
Powerful statement from Kaylee's father, Steve Gonzalez. We're continuing our look at newly released crime scene photos to try to understand what story they are telling. Here to help with our investigation, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan and retired FBI agent Stuart Fillmore. Let's get to some more of the photos that the Moscow Police Department released. These photos from the New York Post. All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, what are you seeing in this particular photo? It looks like it's another part of a bed that was shown perhaps in another one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this very well could be one of the two young ladies upstairs, possibly Maddie's bedroom. We see her Doc Martens there. If you look to the right on the door, there's a bit of dynamic deposition of blood right there, kind of with a downward trajectory. We don't really know what the point of origin is here because we don't have kind of a macro image of the room where it's kind of pulled back. But this is one of those locations, Vin. It's hard to make out from here. I've seen this photo before and hard to pick up, but just give me a little rope here. This is where part of that, the image that I talked about earlier with that 90-degree angle where you've got these passive blood drops are observed. And that's kind of curious because they're immediately adjacent to the door. Again, we can theorize about this all we want, but it's interesting from an observational perspective that he is perhaps making an attempt to exfil out of the room at this point in time and might be standing there holding this blade in his hand. And while he's considering the environment and what he's done, the blood is passively following away and depositing itself right there.
Stuart Fillmore, your thoughts about this first photo? Actually, let's go to the next one. I don't want to run out of time here. I want to make sure we get through all the photos we have. This is another room. What are you seeing? Anything here? Anything of significance?
Well, again, Doc Morgan can speak to the dynamics of the blood that we see, but I think that right there on the door, I think maybe you're seeing some drops up there. He can speak way better than I can to maybe how that might have got there. Vinnie, one of the things that strikes me overall, and this is just kind of a look from my own personal viewpoint, I have a daughter that graduated from college a couple of years ago that's roughly about the same age of these girls. And, you know, I see these rooms and, you know, they're a little messy, and you see the beer cans and all that, and just a typical life of a college student. And, you know, I think we all need to, you know, I think there were times my daughter, you know, having a neat room was not a high priority for her. And, you know, it makes you just realize that stuff like that's not really important. And it just brings home the tragedy of this thing. And that, you know, these were, you know, very young kids that just had their whole lives ahead of them.
What a great point, Stuart. What a great point. Let's take a look at the next photo. Joseph Scott Morgan, this is the stairway. Do we know which one this is? And is there anything of significance that you picked up from this particular photo?
It's really hard to make out. The lighting's kind of poor in this particular shot. I don't even know. It's hard to know if they even used a flash here. Maybe so, because you've got this kind of bounce back that's coming off of those treads. I'm interested about what's on the surface. There's one tread that's in the foreground down at the bottom. I don't know if that's dirt deposition or if maybe that is some kind of biological remnant that's there. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and, you know, we've heard for years now, Vin, you and I have been covering this for years, about the idea that this was a party house. And to Stuart's point, you know, there's a life that's lived in college among these students, and it doesn't go to neatness. That's not at the top of the priority. This is evidence of a life lived, and I don't necessarily think that, you know, crushed beer cans or soda cans and, of course, this styrofoam cup that we see is evidence of a struggle or anything like that. And that's what makes crime scenes particularly difficult to work in a house that's not completely perfectly neat as a pin, because you're stepping into somebody's life in this environment and you're having to separate out what is normal life for them, might not be your normal, but what their normal life is, as opposed to any kind of disruption that's taken place as a result of forced entry and struggle, those things that we talk about all the time.
Well, you talk about entry. I want to take a look at the last photo before we run out of time.
Yeah, sure.
This one, extremely eerie here. These like palm prints on a window. Not sure if it was the killer's palm print or not, but we have about 30 seconds left here. Stuart, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, the thing is, if that's Kohberger that did that, you know, he's looking in. Again, he's still doing surveillance. He's trying to figure out what's in that house. And it shows that as smart as he thought he was, he's putting his hands right there on the glass. Now, if he had gloves on, you're not going to be able to get any latent prints off of that. And if they did get any, I didn't see that in any of the reports. But you certainly could get the size and measurement of his hands from that, which, you know, had they needed to use that, that could have been additional circumstantial evidence.
What a great job tonight. Stuart Fillmore, Joseph Scott Morgan, amazing insight. Thank you so much for helping us work through some of this evidence. You know, the more evidence we see, the more obvious it is to me that prosecutors had an extremely strong case, a case that would be difficult to lose, which is why I'm still shocked that prosecutors gave a deal to one of the most notorious killers in their state's history. It just makes no sense to me. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.